In my last video, I restored this Singer sewing machine table. And now it's time for the big one, the machine itself. You guys really seem to enjoy my last video, as almost 36,000 of you have chosen to watch it. So I thank you very much and I hope you enjoy this one. Let's get into it. So this is the machine that I've bought, and I think it looks absolutely magnificent. But it's in a rough shape. Let me show you. All the components seem to work nicely, but they are covered in a thin film of old grease and probably a lot of cigarette tar. And that is pretty common on these machines that were used in the 1900s, since everybody smoked. Just take a look at the detail that was engraved in every single piece and the amount of attention that went into designing this machine. It looks genuinely beautiful. I want to restore it to its former glory. So let's get to work and let's disassemble the machine first. I want to start with the head assembly. Here you can see two pivoting shafts. One of them is for the sewing machine needle and the other one is for the foot. And I didn't realize it just yet, but it was gonna take a lot of effort to take these things apart, since there's some old grease that has dried onto each and every joint and they need to be broken open. So that means lots of elbow grease and a lot of unorthodox methods. One of the most satisfying things about this machine is the ingenious mechanical solutions and the way each part fits together with another. For example, I thought this was a screw, but eventually I found out that it's just a pivot point fixed in with a grub screw from the side. And it was caked in with so much grease that I had to use a hammer to hit it out from the back. Now, if I'm going to remove these two sliding shafts, then first I need to take off the foot and also the sewing machine's needle. What I find interesting is that the needle used in this old machine is the exact same design that is currently used in my Singer heavy-duty sewing machine that I bought like 2 or 3 years ago. However, this machine cannot do a side-to-side stitch, so only a straight line. And here you can see one of these unorthodox methods that I spoke about earlier. As you can see, by heating it, I managed to get the grease to melt again, and this makes it significantly easier to separate the two parts from one another. Just take a look at how disgusting and crusted these shafts look. This is not okay for a machine of this caliber, and I really want to see it shine again, and I really want to see it work again properly. At this point I've hit a roadblock. I cannot move forward without disassembling the bottom half of the machine. So I'm gonna leave the top for a while and move on to the bottom part of the machine. And here you can see the ingenious design of these Singer sewing machines. Each shaft fitting together perfectly, each cam rotating as it should, timing the movement of the fabric and also of the bobbin, which is responsible for the bottom thread of the sewing machine. It wasn't that difficult to disassemble these parts, but remembering how to put them back together is a whole other challenge. Let me just demonstrate how much effort it takes to unscrew one tiny bolt. As you can see, I'm putting all my weight behind it, and it took a serious amount of force to break this tiny screw loose. Now that everything is unscrewed from the bottom of the machine, I can remove all the shafts, except one, which I couldn't for the life of me get out of there. And it is because it's fixed in place by a rivet. I've tried hammering the rivet out, but it didn't work. And I've tried every other method for getting it loose, but it just didn't come loose. So in the end, I decided to leave it in and try to clean it up as best as I can while it's still attached to the machine. But now that the bottom part is completely disassembled, I can move on to the top and try to hit out the two shafts. I've sped this up for you guys, but it took about a half a day's worth of work just to get these two parts out. It was agony. Now for something a bit more rewarding. The back half of the machine consists of this hand crank and also this subassembly, which is responsible for winding up thread onto the bobbin. It has 30 some odd parts that are only responsible for winding up the bottom thread of the sewing machine onto its bobbin. The hand crank is pretty simple. It's just fixed in place with a couple of screws and nuts and bolts. So I just unscrew them, take them off, and these will need to be painted and cleaned completely separately. But one thing that I didn't expect is to have another component on the shaft, and this one gave me a lot of trouble. This small metal piece that is fitted on the end of the main shaft of the sewing machine is fixed in place by a rivet. And unfortunately, I had to drill this rivet out. But after that, I could remove the end cap on this shaft. Now let's get on to the back of the machine. On the back is the whole head assembly, so basically all parts that connect to the main shaft. And it's quite difficult to film this because only way that you can access it is through 3 service holes, 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom of the machine. I unscrewed 1 bolt and that made this part come loose, and it is absolutely caked in grease. But after that I could finally hammer out the main shaft. And unfortunately that's as far as I got disassembling the main shaft. The main shaft is made up of 2 components which are braced together, and this sliding bearing makes it impossible to get it out. I'm quite mad that I couldn't get the whole top shaft apart, and that is probably because it was so rusted together that even if I did get it apart, I couldn't put it back together the way it was. And it's quite unfortunate, but I mean, I can get to each component on the shaft and clean them perfectly, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. But I will have to pay a bit closer attention when I am repainting the machine. Now, for refinishing the pieces, I've come up with an ingenious machine that I want to use to clean everything up. Check it out. This is my wire brush setup. And I'm going to use this to clean every single shaft component. That means all parts that are coated in grease but do not have a nickel plating. Many of the other components have a nickel plating, which I cannot just use a metal brush on since it will damage the coating. But since these are just cast pieces, I think I can manage a good job in cleaning them with a wire brush. Here you can see the result that the cleaning made. And I think that I've managed to achieve a better finish than if I had just left it caked in grease. So, what do you think? Did I manage to do a good job on this part? Well, anyway, I'm moving on to all the rest, and it's gonna take a bunch of time, but it's pretty satisfying, and it's also easy work with my wire brush setup. I realize that this may not be the safest method for cleaning these parts, but it works really quickly, and I've already spent a bunch of time on this project, so I'm not saying I'm cutting corners, but I'm trying to speed things up so that I can get this ready on time. I don't really have a time constraint on this project, but I wanted to finish it in at least September so that I could start off with something a bit different, because I want to transform this channel into something more than just a restoration channel. Some components require special attention, and for this I need to turn into a chemist. I'm going to use this cold grease remover, and I've tried other solvents, but this works best to remove all the grease that is caked on to these bare metal parts. I think that these are made of some softer cast material because the wire brush just scratches the surface, and I really didn't want to remove any of the surface finish. So even though this may not turn out perfect, I think that this will have to do. What do you think? I think that looks clean enough. I could have tried to clean all screws by the wire brush method, but it would have taken ages. So I just doused them in cold grease remover and then took a rag to it and basically finished it in about 15 or 20 minutes. And they turned out pretty okay. I just used some 1000 grit sandpaper, and it really didn't hurt the fit of the machine, but improved the looks of the shafts by a significant margin. I basically worked in batches, so all the screws and all the parts that came from one part of the machine were cleaned in one go. That meant that I knew where everything goes, and I managed to check the fit in the meanwhile. I used a wire brush, I used cold grease remover, and managed to clean up most of the components. And now I had to turn to the most beautiful parts of the machine. And unfortunately, these are coated with nickel, and that means that cold grease remover kind of damages the finish. And I didn't know this when I was doing the restoration. So I have a couple of spots where the nickel started to peel off. And unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. And next time, I guess I have to be more careful with the solvents I use. Since I couldn't disassemble the shaft any further, that means that I have to clean it in place. But thankfully, since I can slide it around, that won't be that difficult. So that's it. Just about everything is clean on this machine, except the machine housing itself. I couldn't remove this shaft and the one on the bottom, and that's on me, because I didn't really want to damage the machine and I don't have the rivets that are supposed to fix these components in place, and I didn't want to break any bracing. So I guess it's time for the most nerve-wracking part, where I remove all the beautiful painting that is on this machine. From what I understand, there are 3 coats of paint on this machine. A base coat, then a black overcoat with some added details, and also a clear coat. What you can see me wiping off, which is a really nasty black tar, is the top clear coat. And it is probably discolored from all the cigarette smoke and all the dirt that has accumulated on the machine in over 100 years. Unfortunately, cold grease remover stopped at the clear coat layer, and it couldn't really remove anything else, so I had to look for a different option. I tried 4 other solvents: benzene, alcohol, paint stripper, paint thinner, whatever, and none of them worked. So, unfortunately, I had to use an angle grinder. And I say unfortunately because this is a really time-consuming job. So sanding the whole machine down with this wire wheel attachment took about 2 days. And it was really nasty since it covered my workshop in a thin film of black dust, like every single thing I own. And also I had to be careful not to scratch any of the components that I had to leave on the machine. But after a couple of days, I managed to finish most of it. The reason for using this chisel is that I didn't want to touch this beautiful bronze indented piece with the wire wheel, and I wanted to keep it as clean and as scratch proof as I could. But after that, the machine is completely stripped of all paint. It looks really bizarre this way. I mean, all the paint is removed and all the detail and all the beauty that was associated with the paint has been removed. So it looks kind of naked and weird, and I want to restore it to its former glory, and that's why I'm pretty nervous about the next part, because I will need to apply 3 layers of paint and also apply all the decals that were originally on this piece. So it's time to pay some careful attention while doing this. Before I can begin the painting process, I need to cover everything that is not supposed to be painted. So I need to mask all the little components that are supposed to be bare metal, like this copper indented piece. These 2 nails sticking out from the top of the machine are responsible for holding the thread when you are sewing with the machine. And they were bare metal when I got the machine, so they are gonna remain bare metal, and that's why I covered them up. As you can see, there are lots of holes in the whole body of the machine, and all of these holes will need to be covered. Some of them are responsible for the greasing of the machine, so you basically drip grease down into one of these holes and that lubricates the parts underneath. And some of them are responsible for basically the assembly of the machine. So you need to put a screwdriver in to the inside of the machine, and there's no way to reach from anywhere else other than these holes. So I really don't want any paint to get in these. That's why I'm stuffing them with a bunch of cloth and then basically cutting off the excess. And that leaves me with a really nice and clean finish, which I've tested. In the end, I decided to remove some of these, but in this clip you can see me covering every single one of them. And this really wasn't necessary, since the inside of the machine was also painted when I got it, and I couldn't really get that paint out. But after this was done, I could finally start the painting. I applied 2 coats of undercoat and 2 coats of this black paint, and that left me with a pretty shiny and pretty good looking finish. And after fixing any mistake I could see, I can move on to the details. I ordered the details for the machine from an American company, and there's really only one company that sells these details, and these aren't exactly for my machine, but they are really, really close. There are 2 additional decals that won't be applied to my machine because this is not really a Singer 66 type machine, only a Singer Simanco. And there's some slight discrepancies, but most of the designs match really, really well. So I will have some of them to test out how you can actually apply these. And I've watched the videos, I've done some research, but still I'm pretty excited about how this will turn out. So this is the final setup. This is where each component will go. Obviously these 2 Singer decals will not be there, but on the side of the machine. So let's get down to brass tacks. The instructions that came with the decals said that I should soak them in water for about 2 minutes, and that also it shouldn't just be water, I should add some sort of liquid detergent to it. That's because liquid detergent kind of breaks up the surface tension of the water, and it will be way easier to apply to the hydrophobic paint that I applied to the machine. So hopefully this will turn out nicely. So first step is to apply some water to the part where you want to apply the decal. And then you can kind of slide it off the paper. And it is covered by a thin film of adhesive on the bottom. And it's quite important to make sure not to squeeze out this adhesive from under the decal. Now I'm pretty happy with the positioning, but it needs some fine-tuning, and that's why you need to apply water to the bottom surface first, because you can slide these decals around when there's a thin film of water underneath the decal. After that, you can squeeze water out by using some brushes, and also I found that you can use your fingers as well after the majority of the water was gone. So there you go, that's one of them done. Now only like 50 more to go. So again, wet the surface, slide the thing off, and squeeze out all the excess water that is underneath. Pat it dry, and just some finishing touches. Perfect. Okay, let's speed up. This was really relaxing work, and it was awesome to watch this machine come to its former glory. So let's put on some music. Why not? Seriously, that was really satisfying. I mean, putting all of those absolutely beautiful decals back on this machine really makes the whole thing worth it. I mean, I've spent over 80 hours cleaning the machine up and trying to repaint it as carefully as I could, and this is just the cherry on the top. So it took about an hour to apply all the decals, and it really shows that they are perfectly manufactured. And I think that after a couple of layers of clear coat, the machine will be well protected and will have a nice shine to it. Now all that's left is to assemble everything back together as it was. And easier said than done, right? Okay, let's check it out. So now it's time to reassemble everything. Oh god, I hope I remember where each part goes. This is going to be a difficult job, but since I've managed to organize them into 9 different boxes based on where they came from, I hope I can put them back in the correct order. And hopefully cleaning up the machine will have made all the connections nicer and easier to put together, so I won't be needing my hammer that much. Well, so much for that. But for most parts, it is true that I won't need to be using a hammer or any other sort of trick to assemble it, and I can assemble it as it was once assembled. So that means just sliding everything together, everything fits snugly but not too snugly, and everything is well lubricated and working as it should. As you can see, the crank is on and the machine is starting to look way nicer than it was looking before. I didn't show the disassembly of this part because it was a pretty straightforward process. Now, putting it back together is another thing entirely. Since these small components fit together really tightly and really precisely, it was quite a challenge to figure out what goes where. So I took about 30 minutes of my time to just figure out which part goes where. After that, I could assemble it with ease, and I think that it turned out great. It's moving where it should move, it's clicking where it should click, and it's also springing back where it should spring back. Dope. Now let's put it on the machine. I want to make a separate video showing off how the machine works, but I just can't wait to show you guys this. This is one of the most beautiful mechanisms. It's based on a friction attachment to the main crank of the sewing machine, and that rotates the main shaft of this small sub-assembly, which in turn winds up the thread onto the bottom bobbin that is in the sewing machine. Assembling the bottom shafts of the sewing machine was pretty easy. I mean, you really don't need that much fine-tuning with these components, since they are so expertly manufactured that you can basically just slide them together and then fix them in with a couple of nuts and bolts. And it was a really satisfying process to put them back together. And you also don't really need to worry about the timing of the machine, as I didn't really modify the one shaft that is responsible for the timing of the machine. It turned out pretty okay. But I guess time will tell when it's time to try out the machine. And if I need to fine-tune it, I know which screw I need to adjust, and I know which component is responsible for the timing of the machine. This bottom section is where you put the bobbin into the sewing machine and where the bottom thread comes up with each needle stroke. I didn't need to adjust the timing of the sewing machine, but I will need to adjust the stroke length of both of these shafts, and doing that is quite straightforward. So this one is responsible for the foot of the sewing machine. So to adjust the depth that the shaft rises and descends, I need to install the bottom cover plate, or here just place it in place, put on the foot, and then check where it meets the bottom part, then tighten this grub nut, and it's done. It's adjusted. Easy as that. Now it's pretty much the same thing for the shaft with the sewing needle, but here we have one more moving component, and which is this cam that is sitting on the main shaft of the whole head assembly. Now for the crown jewel, that is the cover of the sewing machine. This also has a moving part which is responsible for tensioning the top thread on the sewing machine. And this is just basically a torsion spring that is sandwiched in between two washers. But I wasn't sure that I assembled it in the right order, so this may need some fine-tuning in the end. Now, after this, I had 3 parts remaining, and I was searching where the hell am I supposed to attach this to the machine, because I've forgotten where they had come from. And after searching around for like half an hour where each piece goes, I finally found the place for all of them. And this is the time lapse where I'm doing the final check and checking if everything is rotating correctly, working properly, and fitting together nicely. And hopefully I will have a beautiful machine that is completely restored.
Man, I'm glad I could remember how to put this thing back together. But finally it's finished, and all that's left is to put it into a table and try it out. But trying it out will have to wait for the next video, as I'm still waiting on some parts that I've ordered online and they haven't yet arrived. So if you would like to see that, please subscribe to the channel and watch my next video. And as always, if you find any mistake in my work, please let me know in the comment section below, and I will try to reply to every single one of you. But now for the beauty shots.